This week we're taking a look at the new Baldrick 8 input board from I Like That. We have 8 inputs, 2 pixel outputs, dual Ethernet, and plenty more with the onboard functionality. Let's take a look. Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. Now, we all love putting our shows on, particularly to see the smiles on people's faces. But if we want to put an even bigger smile on people's faces, then we need to add interactivity. And what better way to do that by having buttons or something that people can physically touch to interact with the show and then see different effects happening as a result. Now, it's always been slightly complicated to make that happen. You either have to spin up a dedicated instance of FPP, play around with the GPIOs, getting the buttons configured and stuff like that, and it gets quite complicated quite quickly. But the new Baldrick 8 input board can avoid a lot of that complexity with its inputs here and its onboard firmware that make life a lot easier. To start with, let's take a look at the board itself. From the left here, we've got dual Ethernet inputs, so we can run 10100 Ethernet, which is plenty fast enough for most shows. And we can daisy chain not only this board, but to another board. So if we're running, say, a Baldrick 8 or a regular controller alongside it, we can daisy chain them to make life easier. We've got our one button on the board, which is labeled "Oh no," and that is to do a hard reset. So if we mess something up completely in the configuration and we can't get back to it, we can hold down the "Oh no" button, apply power, keeping the button held for about 10 seconds, and then it will do a complete reset so that we can start again. We have 4 inputs, and these are all 3-pole or 3-pin inputs. We have a common ground on the right hand side here. The center pin is for our momentary switched input, so we're going to connect that to a simple make to break switch. And then on the left hand side here we have a power output, which can be used for illuminating arcade style buttons. Underneath we've got a pair of regular pixel outputs. So as with all of the regular Baldrick boards, these are rated at 7.5 amps and they're fused as such, and they can run up to 750 pixels at up to 40 frames per second. Moving across to the right, we have a battery holder. I understand this is for a real-time clock, which functionality is to come in a later release of firmware. We have a small 2-pin Phoenix connector for power in to drive the lamp outputs on these inputs. So if our arcade buttons are rated at 5 volts illumination, but we're running 12 volt pixels, then we've got a separate power feed for that. And last of all, a regular large size power input connector for our pixels. The whole thing is on a standard Baldrick medium size board, which is exactly the same size as the Baldrick 8, the Baldrick Switchy and the Baldrick DMX, amongst others, which makes life a lot easier for configuring mounts and stuff. Rather than having to create new ones for every different type of board, they've standardized, and that makes it a lot easier. And in fact, we'll use that functionality right now. I've got here an RSP 320 power supply with a mount that was designed for the Baldrick 8. So the input 8 will fit straight on here, and there we are. nice and easily ready for our demo. So let's get the power hooked up. First of all, I'm going to do negative. Oh, let's go with positive then. Positive and negative. There we go. Let's hold those there. Now there we go. Oh, there we go. Let's just screw those down. Now the RSP320 is of course overkill for this particular board. It's rated at 30 amps and our 2 pixel outputs are only rated at 15. But it's what I had to hand and it makes it nice and easy for the demo. And then I've got a separate power feed coming up to drive my board. There we are, to drive the button illuminations. Now for the buttons, for this demo I'm using my trusty set of buttons that I've got here that I've had for a few years now. These are illuminated arcade style buttons, and if I take one apart, we can see that we've got an LED in the front here, and then we've got a switch at the back. I've hooked up the ground wire here, is going to one side of the switch and then to one side of the LED, and then I've got separate connections for the output from the switch and the other side of the LED, and they wire back to a standard Phoenix connector. So let's get those hooked up. In a best Blue Peter moment, here's some I prepared earlier. There we go. Right, number 1. And then I'm going to go number 2. And then 3, 4 and 5 along the bottom. 3. 4. And there we are, 5. So that's my buttons connected up, and then I've got a small prop here, a little 50 count star. I think it's a GE, star, it's a flake, isn't it? A 50 count GE flake here, I think it's a flake B. We can hook that up as well. So there we are, quite a lot going on. We've got all our connections done and we're ready to demo. So here we go with a fresh install of Baldrick as usual. Let's just hit the Let's Get Started button. And this just takes a few moments for it to pull the latest firmware and then to reboot, and away we go. Now this is running real time, I've got no trickery here, and you can see it's all quite a fast affair. The board is just rebooting and then we should be good to go. There we go. And it's up and it's ready for us. Now we have the standard I like that type interface here. So we've got our basic info at the top, giving us our uptime, what data it's receiving, which is obviously none at the minute, the temperature and so on. Test mode, so we can test any pixels that are configured, and we haven't configured any yet. Cunning effects, this is Baldrick's interpretation of the WLED style effects. So we've got onboard effects that we can use on the board, and indeed those onboard effects can be triggered from the buttons to drive the props themselves. So if we're doing a basic selfie station, we could set up some cunning effects, get them triggered by the buttons, displayed on the props, And we don't need to mess about with FPP or X lights at all. It can be a completely standalone instance. Once it's set up, you don't even need Ethernet. Once configured, it can just get on with it. Give it some juice and off it goes. Turnip network. Now the turnip network is a mechanism whereby the Baldrick boards can talk to each other to activate different functions on other boards without any interaction from FPP, X lights, anything like that. It's found this other board on the network all by itself. We haven't had to do anything, and we could include that in the functionality from the buttons now, again with no interaction with FPP or X lights. So if we're running a big selfie station that has multiple props across different ports, we could daisy chain a Baldrick 8 on here, and then we could activate multiple events simultaneously. Port config, this is where we set up our pixel outputs. So I'm going to do that in a moment. And then buttons, and this is where we set up what our buttons are going to do. Last of all, our host name for the network and whether it's on DHCP, static, etc. Let's go back up. First thing I'm going to configure here is a pixel port. So I'm going to add a model to my port. Now normally this would be pushed from X lights, but I'm doing it manually here to demonstrate how it can be done. We've got a flake here, so I'm just going to call it flake B, I think it is, and it has 50 pixels. Save, done. So that's our flake added just as the model. We can self-test that now. If we go into test mode, there we go. We can see now that our pixels are doing their thing, and that is all good. So our output is working. Cunning effects. So I'm going to set up a quick cunning effects. So our lovely new preset, let's rename that to rainbow. And I'm going to add an effect, and there's a good number of different effects here. I'm actually going to use the color slash because I quite like that. We can add different colors here. And I can, for instance, go with red, green. Oh, press the wrong button. There we go. I can go with green and blue. Okay, and save. So start a preset, and if we play that preset now, that is scrolling through the red, green and blue on the flake. Okay, down to buttons then. So let's get a button to turn that cunning effect on and do something. So I'm going to go down to the bottom to configure. Configure one, button number 1, pressed momentarily, and toggle a cunning effects preset. Now it's defaulted to trying to output to the other Baldrick that's on the network, but I'm going to use this board, and there's our rainbow preset. When the preset is triggered, lock the button out for 5 seconds and turn its bulb off. So at the moment the bulbs on these are all illuminated, and this being the yellow one here being button 1. Once we press it, the light should go out on button 1 and it will lock out for 5 seconds. So let's save that. Now we don't need to reboot or restart anything, it's ready to go straight away. So if I hold up my flake and I push my button here, the button should go out and the flake has come on. So there we are, we've got our first selfie station activity running off our button here. Now our button has already re-illuminated because the 5 seconds has passed, so I can just push it again and that turns it off. So that's quite simple. So we've got a cunning effect running off a button, driving a prop. Now I've got different coloured buttons here, so you could configure different cunning effects based on the colours perhaps, and then they can push different colours to see different effects happening. Now I've also got behind me some pixels with some C7 covers on them, as you can see, and they are wired up to my Baldrick 8, which is just out of sight over here. For button 2, the white one here, we can set up the same sort of effect but on our C7 bulbs on the other controller. So if I go back into reconfigure, this time button 2, momentarily, I'm going to toggle a cunning effects preset. This time I'm going to configure it on the Baldrick 8 that's out of shot, and this already has one in there for C7 rainbow, and that's for those C7s behind me. Now I haven't had to tell this input board anything about the B8. It's gone and talked to it. It's pulled in all the preset information automatically by itself, so it's ready for us just to select. Again, we're going to lock out for 5 seconds and save. There we go. So we're ready to go again. If I now push the white button, which is connected to input 2, we should get activity on the C7s. And there we go. We can see that our rainbow effect is now running on the C7s behind me, and we're good to go there. So you can see that we can really expand on the selfie type effects with no interaction from FPP and X lights. So it can be a completely self-contained little unit. Now I've heard away from FPP and X lights so far, but they can of course be used with this board as well. The 2 pixel output boards can receive data in DDP and E131 just like any other regular pixel controller, so we can send that as usual. I'm not going to go into that in detail because it's the same as every other controller on the planet. Where it does differ is the input side. Now I do have a tiny little demo set up on an FPP instance here. It's not actually going to output any effects to X-Light, to the pixels, but we can see that a playlist can be started using the input board. If I go to button number 3, let's configure that. Once again, the input 8 will automatically detect an instance of FPP on the same network, and it will gather the playlist information from it ready for us to configure. So if I set up button number 3 momentarily again, I can control an FPP instance. It's found my instance of FPP. Do we want it to adjust the volume or play something? In this case we want it to play something. Do we want to run a sequence or a playlist, or indeed run a random sequence for a playlist? So you could set it up to do random things. I'm going to run a sequence or playlist, and in fact I've got a playlist here called FPP example. Only if FPP is idle at the time, so that would stop the youngsters bashing every button and FPP getting itself in a right angle. Once you've pushed it, the sequence is going to run, and that's it. Only when the sequence stops can you press it again. So we'll say only if FPP is idle. There we go. Button will lock out for 5 seconds. A handy thing here for the devs might be to lock it out for the duration of the sequence. When locked out, its light will turn off. Another thing that might be useful here is the ability to turn off all of the lights. So once you've pressed something, all the lights go out until it's finished what it's doing, and then it will wake up again. So that's done. Save. There we go. So button 3 is now configured. Baldrick Input 8 will request that the FPP demo If it's idle, play FPP example. So if I go to FPP, there is my example ready to go. And if I push button number 3, it's now playing that demo. Now all the demo does is pause for a few seconds and then go back to the beginning again. But it shows you that you can trigger an FPP event from the input buttons. Now this has been a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but we've demonstrated on the input 8 that we can connect up multiple buttons. We can have it do effects internally with the 2 pixel ports on board. We can have it connect directly to another Baldrick and play effects on there, such as the ones that are happening on the C7s behind me. Both of those can happen without FPP or X-Lite's interaction at all, so they could be set up completely standalone. Once configured, you can take the network away and then the board will just do its thing. And then at the end, we have had a quick look at interfacing the input 8 with an FPP instance on the same network. We could use a button to trigger the playlist or a sequence from FPP, and then obviously the FPP will output as usual to your regular controllers. The input 8 here can and does act as a regular controller as well, so it just has 2 pixel ports, but you can of course then daisy chain it using Ethernet to more controllers if you wish. There we go. I hope you found that one useful. As always, do like, share, subscribe and all that good stuff. And we'll catch you in the next one. Take it easy.